You wake up in the dark. No phone, no sun yet, and somehow, you already know it's almost time to move. How? For most of human history, there were no clocks, no calendars hanging on a wall, no little number in the corner of a screen telling you what day it is. And yet your ancestors didn't just guess. They tracked time with a precision that still surprises archaeologists today. They just didn't do it the way you'd expect. Let's start with something small enough to fit in your palm. A bone. Just a bone. Found in a cave in the Lubombo Mountains, on the border of South Africa and Eswatini. It's the fibula of a baboon. And it's covered in 29 notches. Cut by hand. In neat rows. 29. That number isn't random. It's almost exactly the length of a lunar cycle. The time it takes the moon to go from full to dark, and back to full again. This bone is around 43,000 years old. Some researchers think it's one of the oldest mathematical tools ever found. Think about that for a second. Before agriculture, before writing, before most of what you'd call civilization, someone sat down with a sharp stone and carved a calendar into bone. They weren't doing this for fun. There's an even older bone that tells a similar story. The Ishango bone, discovered near a lake on the border of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda. Dates back roughly 20,000 years. It's covered in rows of notches grouped in sets. And researchers have debated its purpose ever since it was found. Some think it's an early counting tool, a kind of prehistoric calculator. Others believe the groupings line up with the days of a lunar cycle. It's entirely possible it was used for more than one purpose at once. Math and moon tracking woven into the same small object. Either way, the message is the same. Someone, tens of thousands of years ago, looked at the sky, looked at a bone, and decided the two belonged together. Anthony Aveni, an archaeoastronomer at Colgate University, has spent decades studying how ancient people read the sky. His research points to lunar timekeeping going back possibly 30,000 years or more. And the reason is simple. The moon was the easiest clock in the world to read. Unlike the sun, which just rises and sets the same way every day, the moon changes shape. New moon, crescent, half, full, back down again. Anyone, anywhere, could look up and know roughly where they were in the cycle. That mattered more than you might think. If you knew the moon's rhythm, you knew when nights would be darkest and most dangerous to travel in. You knew when the moon would be bright enough to hunt by. The late archaeologist Alexander Marshak spent years examining engraved bones from Ice Age Europe under a microscope. And he found something that looked less like decoration and more like notation. On a bone fragment from a site called Abri Blanchard in France, dated to around 28,000 years ago, he identified a sequence of marks made with different tools at different times. A pattern he believed tracked the changing phases of the moon across roughly 2 months. Not a tally, not random scratches, a running record. Marshak's full interpretation has been debated by other researchers ever since, which is exactly how good science is supposed to work. But the broader pattern, ancient people marking lunar phases on bone, shows up again and again across sites in Ice Age Europe. Whatever the precise method, something was clearly being tracked. So picture it, cold air, a small group huddled near a fire. Someone holds a piece of bone close to the flame, turning it slowly, running a thumb over the notches, counting, not because anyone told them to, but because their next hunt, their next gathering trip, their next decision about when to move camp depended on knowing what the sky would do next. Now scale that idea up. Way up. In 2013, archaeologists in Aberdeenshire, Scotland, uncovered something at a site called Warren Field that rewrote what we thought we knew about ancient calendars. 12 pits, dug in a curved line, each one aligned with a different phase of the moon. The whole arrangement also pointed toward the winter solstice sunrise, the shortest day of the year. Researchers dated it to around 10,000 years ago. Built not by farmers, not by a kingdom with scribes and record keepers, but by hunter-gatherers. 12 pits, 12 lunar months, a full year, laid out in the dirt, recalibrated every winter against the sun. That's not guesswork. That's an engineered solution to a hard problem. How do you reconcile the moon's 29.5-day cycle with the slightly longer solar year? Without writing. Without mathematics as we define it today. And they weren't the only ones thinking this big. Around 9,000 years later, give or take, people in what's now southeastern Turkey raised massive carved stone pillars at a site called Göbekli Tepe. Some researchers, including a team from the University of Edinburgh, have proposed that certain symbols carved into the stone, including repeated V-shaped marks, may represent a count of days tied to solar and lunar cycles. It's a striking claim, and like most claims about prehistoric symbolism, it's still being debated, but the site itself is undisputed. Massive, deliberate, astronomically aligned, built thousands of years before anyone in that region was farming a single crop. Here's the twist most people don't expect. You'd assume timekeeping got invented because someone needed to schedule something. A meeting, a trade, a harvest. But the order is backwards. The need for organized agriculture didn't create calendars. Calendars came first. Hunter-gatherers were already reading the sky like a survival manual, tens of thousands of years before anyone planted a seed on purpose. Time wasn't invented to manage civilization. Civilization showed up after people had already learned to manage time. And it wasn't only the moon. The sun did its own kind of work. A stick driven into the ground casts a shadow that swings and stretches through the day. Shortest at noon, longest at dawn and dusk. No tools required, no skill beyond watching. Researchers studying ancient shadow tracking note that almost any object that casts a shadow can function as a rough clock. And there's good reason to think people were using that trick long before anyone built a formal sundial. Stonehenge itself, raised in stages starting around 5,000 years ago, is aligned so precisely with the summer solstice sunrise that it's hard to call it an accident. So by the time the first true sundials and water clocks appear in ancient Egypt, more than 3,500 years ago, none of this was new. It was the next step. A refinement of something people had been doing in some form for tens of thousands of years already. Watching the sky, marking the moon, counting the days, because their lives depended on getting it right. There was a third clock too. One that never needed a single mark carved into anything. The stars. At night, the entire sky rotates slowly from east to west. The same stars rising and setting in the same order. Night after night, season after season. A hunter who knew that pattern could tell roughly how many hours of darkness were left just by glancing up. A traveler could hold a direction in pitch black with no path to follow. This kind of knowledge leaves almost no trace in the archaeological record. No bones, no carvings, nothing to dig up, but it would have been just as essential as anything notched into a fibula. Passed down the only way it could be. By one person showing another where to look. Now think about your own day. You probably haven't looked at the moon this week. You don't need to. A screen in your pocket already knows what day it is. What time it is. Down to the second. Synced to satellites you'll never see. That convenience came from somewhere. It came from a baboon bone with 29 notches. From pits dug in Scottish soil and aligned to midwinter light. From people who had no writing. No numbers as we'd recognize them. And who still managed to build something accurate enough that we're still finding it. And still arguing about it. Tens of thousands of years later. You wake up in the dark. And you don't have to wonder what day it is. You just check your phone. They had to read the sky. And they read it well enough that some of what they built is still standing.